Hello my friends, today we are going to continue breaking down the editing on this image, the Undiscovered Country. So this is the second part. If you missed the first part, there is a link to that in the description below. In the first part, we talked about how to bring the mannequin head here into the image and how to create this removed face effect. So in this part, we're going to add skin texture to our mannequin head to make it look a little more human. And we are also going to add a shadow to make it look like it actually belongs here in this background. So we're going to start by adding our skin texture. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange my layers here. So I want this grass layer to be on the very top. So I'm just going to drag that up to the very top. And then just beneath that, I'm going to create a new group and I'm going to call it skin texture. Okay, so I have a few skin textures that I made to use for this. And I actually just made these myself. I used an image of myself where it had like a nice even lighting. For this kind of thing, you really want just the lighting to be as even as possible because I really don't want this texture to affect the lighting in my original image. So these should be perfect for our skin textures, and I have a few different ones so that I can create some variation here. So we'll just start with this first one and click Command A to select it and Command C to copy it, and we'll come over here to our original image and we'll hit Command V to paste it. So right now I'm just going to move this over here. Right now it's affecting the entire image and I don't want that. I just want it to affect my mannequin head. So I am going to hold Command and click on my mannequin head layer so that it will select all of the pixels on that layer. Then I'm going to go up here to my skin texture group and I'm going to hit the add layer mask button. So now I have a layer mask that is making it so that these items in this group will only affect the mannequin head. However, it is still also affecting this black portion of the face opening and we don't want that either. So we'll go into our face opening group here. We will hold Command and click on the black layer. And then we will go back up here to our layer mask and we will fill that with black. So right now I have my black as my background color. So I'm going to hit Command Delete to fill that with black. And then I'll hit Command D to deselect that. So now everything that's within this group will only affect the actual skin on the mannequin head. So let's go ahead and zoom in. And I think the placement of this is already just fine. We could maybe turn it on its side. Maybe it would cover a bit more that way. So let's hit Command T and I'm now on that layer with the skin texture on it. And I'm just going to rotate this. I'm going to hold Shift so that I can rotate it exactly 90 degrees. And then I'm just going to move this around. So yeah, I think that's good because it'll cover a little bit more area. And that should be fine right there. Now we are going to change the blend mode to overlay. And then we're going to add a levels adjustment to just kind of darken it a little bit because as you can see it's a bit bright. So I'm going to hit Command L to get a levels adjustment. And I'm going to start by just pulling down the general brightness of the overall image. So if you pull this white slider where it says output levels down here, if you pull this to the left, it'll just darken the entire image a little bit. So that's what we're going to do first. And that actually already looks pretty good right about there. We could maybe also adjust our midtones a little bit. Let's pull this a little bit to the right to darken those. And I don't know if I want to do that. Let's go back. Let's go. Okay, we'll do right about there. So we'll just click OK. And now I'm going to grab my eraser. So I'm going to hit E to get my eraser. And I should already have a soft brush on my eraser, and I do. It's at 0% hardness, and that's what I want. and my opacity is 100%, my flow is 20%, and that's just fine for what I'm going to do right now. So I just want to get rid of the hard edges on this, so you can still see, let me zoom in a little more, you can still see this hard line from the edges of the image that we brought in there, and I don't want that. So we're just going to lightly kind of erase that hard edge out so it blends better with the overall image. Okay, yeah, I think that looks much better. We don't see that hard line anymore. So this is basically the idea. We're just going to keep adding these patches of skin texture until we've covered the entire surface area of our mannequin head here. So we'll do a few more together and then I'll just kind of skip ahead. So I'm just going to keep moving down the line here. So we started with this one, now we'll do this one. So again, Command A to select, Command C to copy, and Command V to paste. And then we will just move this into place. So one thing is that I do want the size of the skin texture to match, and this is a slightly smaller image and I think it's making the texture look a tiny bit smaller. So I'm gonna hit Command T to transform it. I'm just gonna make it a tiny bit bigger. Like that's probably good. Okay, and again, I just want to try to cover as much real estate on my mannequin head as I possibly can with each patch, because it'll just make the work a little faster for me. But this is one of those things that just takes a little bit of time, and that you're going to have to be willing to commit to putting that extra time in when you're building your image. And it is little details like this that you spend this extra time on that can really make or break an image. So in my opinion, it's definitely worth it. So we're going to go here and we will select overlay, and then again we will hit Command L to get a levels adjustment, and we're just going to keep repeating here. So I'm going to bring down the overall brightness, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it to see where it starts to kind of blend with the actual tones in the mannequin head. So that's definitely much better. Now we're going to come over here, and you probably want to make sure that your midpoint is at least within the area of this graph here. So that's one thing that I'm looking for. I don't really want it like way over here, so I'll bring it this way. I think that already looks pretty good. I could slide this up just a hair. Maybe a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to click OK, and then we will again get our eraser. So we'll hit E, get our eraser, and we'll just make sure that we erase out any hard edge that we have there. Okay, so I already think that's looking a lot better. So it's okay if I kind of tap it down a little bit in some places, because it'll still show through. I just really want to get that edge out of there, and also just make it look like it's seamlessly blending between the different areas. So one thing that I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to hit O to get my dodge and burn tool. So right now I want to burn, so I'm going to hold shift and click O to scroll through. So you can, if you hold shift and just keep hitting O, it'll scroll through all the tools within your dodge and burn. And I want the burn. So the burn looks like a little hand. And I have it set to mid-tones and exposure of 5%. I'm just going to keep it like that. And I think I already have a soft brush here. Usually I do, yes. Okay, so we're just going to ever so lightly kind of darken this here. So I'm using my pen tablet, and I'm really lightly doing this. I'm not going crazy with it, just very lightly tapping that in. Now you can see when I did that, it kind of brought back some of that definition on the edge there. So that's something we'll have to come back and clean up a little bit. I'm gonna do it over here too, to try to blend. I want the tones to look even like they're blending with the mannequin head naturally. So I think that already looks pretty good. Now I can actually use my dodge tool as well. So if I hit shift and scroll through again, this is the dodge. I'm not sure what that is. It just looks like a little wand or something. we could kind of dodge some of this a little bit, and that might help us to even our edge, because it just darkened that edge just a tiny bit too much. And yeah, that already looks much, much better. Okay, so I think we're good. And again, I'm just gonna keep repeating this process as I move around the entire mannequin head. So rather than making you watch me go through this, we're gonna kind of skip ahead to the next part. Okay, so I have now placed my textures onto my mannequin head, and as you can see, that is completely covering the entire surface area here. So what I want to do now is, I'm just going to zoom back out a little bit. I want to combine all these layers because I have 27 layers with skin texture on it. So I'm just going to select the top layer here. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, hold shift and click on this first layer. And then I am going to hit Option Command E to merge those. So at first that's going to look really strange, but it's because I need to change the blend mode on this layer to overlay. So I'll change to overlay, and now it should look fine. The other thing is that it looks heavier right now since it's like doubled up. But what we're going to do is, now that we have our merged copy, we're just going to delete all of these other layers. And there we go. Now we have our skin texture on one single layer, and it looks pretty darn good. So if we still wanted to make any last minute refinements to that, we could just do that right here on this layer. So I'm just going to call this skin texture. Okay, so now we have our skin texture. We need to add our shadows. So there's actually a couple of shadows that I'm going to add. One is that I'm going to actually add a shadow on the head from the grass down here. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to hold Command and click on my grass layer. And I'm also going to add my layer mask to that from my head layer, because as you'll recall, I used my grass brush on that layer mask as well. So I'm going to right click on this mask, and I'm going to select Add Mask to Selection. And there we go. So now I'm going to go back up here to the grass layer. I'm going to hold Command and click on the New Layer button to add a layer beneath that layer. And then I'm going to fill this. So actually, let me zoom out. So what it did is it actually selected the inverse of what I wanted. So I'm going to hit Shift Command I to inverse my selection, so that it's just this grass area down here that I have selected. And then I'm going to hit Shift Delete, and I'm going to choose for fill color. And I'm going to pick up a color from the shadows here. So that's fine. And then I want it darker. That's much too light. So we're going to just go straight down from there into the darker tones in that same range, and click OK and click OK. And there we go. So as you can see, it looks a little bit strange right now, but we're going to fix it. So we only want it to affect the actual mannequin head. So we will hold Command and click on our mannequin head layer, and we're going to add that as a layer mask here. So now it won't be just going everywhere. And then we are going to tap it a little bit. So I'm just using my move tool here. If you don't have your move tool, you can hit V. And I'm just tapping it a little bit to the right and just a tiny bit up as well. And then let's zoom in even further so we can really get a good look at this. Okay, so now we're going to blur it just a little bit. So we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and let's see, 1 pixel might be good enough. 1 or 2 pixels, I think. Let's do 2 pixels and click OK. And then let's paint some more on our layer mask. So I've got my layer mask selected. I'm going to get my brush. I'm going to make sure that I have it in black. So I already have my default colors. If you don't, you can hit D. And then I'm going to hit X here to get my black brush. And I'm actually going to start out with my brush at a flow of 100%. So I'm going to hold Shift and hit 0. And then I want to make sure it's a soft brush. Okay, so let's get rid of a bunch of this on the bottom here. So once I get rid of this main kind of line, then I will make my brush flow a little lower. So let's just get rid of that. Okay, so now let's change the flow back to like 20%. So I'm holding Shift and hitting 2 on my keyboard. And I also want to lower the opacity of this layer. So let's go back to the actual layer. I'm gonna hit V for my move tool. And as long as you have your move tool selected, you can just press the numbers on your keyboard to change the opacity. So if I hit 6 on my keyboard, that'll change the opacity to 60%. If I hit 7, it'll change it to 70, 3 will change it to 30, and so on. And if you want to do in between numbers, you can actually just type the 2 numbers that you want. So if you want like 45%, you would just hit 4 or 5. Okay, so I think we want it a little darker than that, maybe 60% looks pretty good, or let's try like 55%. Okay, so now let's go back to our layer mask. And we're just gonna paint more of this out. So I'm gonna hit B to get my brush again. I've already got the flow set to 20%, and I just don't want it creeping too far down beneath the sort of edge of that mannequin head area, because that should be mostly covered with grass, so we shouldn't really be able to see the shadow there. Okay, so I think that looks a lot better, and let's just kind of turn this off and on so we can see the difference there. And I definitely think that looks better, because there should be, with a really hard lighting like this, there should be a little bit of a shadow from the grass falling on our subject there. So I am going to paint out a little more along the edge here. I'm just going to make my brush nice and big for that and kind of stay zoomed out. Okay, so I'm just turning that off and on again, and I think that's looking pretty good. So it just, to me, adds a little extra element of realism to the image. So now let's create the shadow for the actual mannequin head. So first I'm going to call this layer, we'll just call it grass shadow. Okay, so now let's group these grass layers. So I'll hold Shift and click the original grass layer and hit Command G to group those, and we'll just call it grass. So for our shadow for the mannequin head, we only want that to really affect the background layer. So I'm going to come all the way down here to the background, and I'm going to add a layer on top of that, and we'll just call it head shadow. And then we will hold Command and click on the head layer, and then we're going to fill this. So again, we'll hit Shift Delete, and the color that we already had should be okay, but let's just pick a different color. So I'm gonna pick a color from over here, and I'm gonna make it again darker. So that should be good. Click OK and OK. Okay, so now hit Command D to deselect, and now we're gonna hit Command T to transform this, and I'm gonna zoom out just a little bit. And I'm going to hold command as I grab the corners here, and this will kind of allow me to move them more freely. So I'm going to hold command and pull that down, and then I'm still holding command. I'm just holding command this whole time. I'm going to kind of gradually work these down here until the shadow gets nice and flat behind our subject. So something like this. I think I probably went a little too far on this one. Yeah, there we go. So if you move it in a way that doesn't make sense, it'll kind of stop working. But I do want it to look nice and flat and like it's spreading out behind the subject here. And I think I'm gonna widen it just a little bit. So instead of holding command, I'm gonna hold shift and pull on this side just to kind of widen it. And now I'm gonna hold command and pull these out a little bit more. And then I'm going to hold command and pull on these as well. So these are kind of like the ones that are on the other end. Okay, so I think this is starting to get to where I want it, something like this. Okay, so let's commit to that and let's zoom in here. Okay, so yeah, I think that looks pretty good, and we will erase some of this out of here. But for right now, I just want to get the shadow looking right. So we're gonna blur it. So we'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and the shadows in this image are pretty hard. So if you look at like the rock shadows, and even the shadows of the grass and the plants, they're very hard, very defined shadows. So we don't want it to be too blurred, but this probably isn't quite enough. So I'm gonna move it up. Maybe we'll go about there. So we're doing 5.6 pixels. And now let's zoom back out again and let's lower the opacity. So I want to kind of, here, let's zoom all the way back out. I want to match the opacity and also the tone of these other shadows in the image. So I'm going to hit V, make sure I have my move tool, and just press the numbers on my keyboard to change my opacity. So 70 is still a bit much, I think. That's 60%. That's looking probably closer. Yeah, I think that's good. Maybe it's still a little bit dark. That's 55%. Actually, I think 60% is pretty good. So one thing is that the shadow is a little warmer than I want it to be. If you look at the shadows over here, they are a little bit more cool in tone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a hue saturation layer, and I'm going to clip it to the shadow. So in order to do that, I'm going to right click and choose create clipping mask. And then I'm going to check colorize, and I'm going to move this into these blue tones over here. So not too extreme, but something like that I think is looking closer to the tones we actually have in these shadows over here. So let's just kind of move this around a little more. And pick something that we think looks good. So I think right around here is good. And I might lower the opacity on that a little bit. So I still have my move tool selected. Let's try 80% opacity. And yeah, I think that is now matching the tones in the other shadows a little better. I do think I might lower the opacity on the shadow itself a little more though. So let's try 50%. And let's actually do 55%. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. So now I'm gonna zoom back in and we're gonna get rid of any of this that we don't want. And we're also gonna soften this edge on this side because it's falling on the grass, and I just feel like in this grassy area we wouldn't get quite that defined of a line. So to do that, I'm actually going to add a layer mask, because that way if I mess anything up I can go back and fix it. So I'm going to hit B to get my brush. I already have black as my foreground color, and I'm going to start by painting with probably 100% flow, so I'll hit Shift 0 just to get rid of all of this that I definitely don't want. So I don't want any of this showing up over here. I only want it behind my subject. So I'm just gonna paint this completely out. And as I get closer to the edge over here, I'll be a little more careful. Just kind of tap that out to the edge. Okay, now let's zoom out so that we can make sure we didn't miss anything. So I'm just going to turn this off and on, and it doesn't look like we missed anything, so we should be good. So we will zoom back in again, and now we will just soften up this edge. So for that, I'm going to lower the opacity, or I'm sorry, the flow again on my brush, and this time I'm going to make it, I guess we'll do 20%. 20% seems to be my favorite. So we'll hit Shift 2 and make the brush a little bigger, and I'm just gonna like lightly kind of tap this into the edge here. Okay, so now let's zoom back out and just see how that looks. And I think it looks pretty good now. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll kind of layer shadows, but because the shadows in this image are just really hard to find, I don't think I'm going to do that in this case. I actually think that shadow looks just fine. So now we have skin texture on our mannequin, which makes her look a little more human-like. And we also have our shadow so that she actually looks like she's really sitting here within this scene rather than kind of like she still doesn't belong somehow. And that is going to be it for this portion of the tutorial. In the next section, we will begin breaking down the editing of bringing in the coral brain piece and also the reflective area. I don't know if that might end up getting broken up into a couple of videos or how that will go, but we will move on to that next segment in our next video. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I hope to see you next time.